this is actually a shorter time slot. It's only 45 minutes, so we're going to talk really quickly. Anyway, I'm glad that you all were here to take this panel in after lunch, and it's always a good time when you're wide awake. So what we have today is we have a very a topic that can be very vague, and so before we start the panel, I figured I would ask everybody how they decided that this was something that they were interested in. Bruno. Yeah.
I mean, anything that it's related to using data to make anything smarter, it's interesting for us.
Okay.
But especially in this space, well, we have been trying to make it smarter and, bring the, the avalanche of data that we have to the reality and to real use cases.
Okay.
So that's the...
Okay, so you're interested in getting us real. Okay. Sara?
Yeah.
Excellent. Sara?
I'm Sara. So the company I work for does a managed service for publishers. So we talk about data all the time, whether it's how to monetize better, how to get information for programming or scheduling so that you can actually make informed decisions about what is performing for better monetization. And then also trying to figure out who your audience is. So we kind of have these conversations throughout in order to help folks make more money off the content that they produce.
Okay, so we're going to go with make more money. Okay.
Hi, Natasha, Head of Data and Research at Vevo. So for me, this topic is almost everything in the sense that is really the function of my job, to make sure that we are monetizing data in a lot of ways, right? Revenue, incremental margin, incremental operational efficiency. We are an organization where the data team does a lot more than just pulls insights for business stakeholders. A big part of what we do is try to determine what is the strategy for monetization, because it can be nuanced and there are a lot of ways in which you can translate data into ROI. So big topic for me, important topic for me.
Okay, so I'm going to go with how to define the strategies behind monetization. Okay, perfect. I'm just like putting labels on things so then I can sort them later. Shailley.
Because you can't do advertising without data. It's the life bloodstream of all advertising. And I'm from Tech Lab, IIB Tech Lab, where we build standards for all parts of the advertising workflow. So data is really, really important.
Okay, perfect. And in fact, I know there's a standard for that.
Yep. There's a spec for that.
Oh, there's a spec for that.
Yeah, if you're thinking about any solution, go check out our website. There's already a specification built for that.
Excellent, excellent. So let's continue on here. We decided that we needed to define what types of data we're talking about. So do you want to jump in and just give us a starting insight on, if we're talking about data and monetization, what kind of data do we want to talk about?
Sure. I think first thing is to differentiate between identity and data. It's typically kind of mixed between the two. Identity is the information that identifies a user or a device in the system. Data is what that device or user is doing or activities that they're doing, keeping a track of that. And that's like one part of the data, like that's the audience data that we typically talk about monetizing or activating or starting a campaign with. And then there are two other types of data I think that we all need to track. One is the campaign data itself, about the campaign, about each creative and how it's performing and identifying that creative. And the third part is which also ties into the first audience data, is the measurement data, like what actually happened when you ran the advertisement, like measuring the impressions, a number of counts of the campaign, and also then measuring what actions were taken on that. So I would kind of divide it into like these three big buckets of data.
So, and I guess that because we're talking about such vast topics, so I want to actually go to Bruno, just because, Bruno, when you work with your customers, what's the most important thing you can tell them about data, or what is the data that they have the questions about?
That's a good question. Well, extending on, I believe the three main areas are important, but I believe that making sense of the data is the main goal. and especially being able to understand why things happen the way they happen. So tracking, it's somehow easy, and we track mainly everything. So all the behaviors of all the users, all devices, all the impressions, all the conversions, so fine. But why this ad is converting with this user? Why this user is interacting with this ad? Why this placement works better than that other placement? Why this content offers better results with this kind of publisher and so on? So that kind of correlations are usually the ones that are most interesting to go after. And usually the challenge is to be well supported by standardization, metadata, and so on. That gives you the capability to understand really what happens.
If I can add one thing. So it's interesting, I think in this more ad tech context, we might lose sight of another really important data set for monetization, which is CRM and OMS, the data sets about the people, right, who are transacting, who are managing the campaigns, but then who are ultimately selling. It's a very important data set that's extremely messy because of all the human manual data entry involved, but it's critical, right, for any media company that has an ad sales team.
Okay. Sarah, you're the odd person out right now. So data can be any number of things, but is there something else that you want to add that these guys didn't yet touch on?
See, from my publisher suite, we represent around 25 different folks. There's often a conversation about the lack of data from platforms or in monetization and the frustrations around that for even identifying who their audience is or what their content is doing. So I have quite a few conversations about frustration for, you know, this promised land of data. It's streaming, and yet what they have limited access to.
Okay. Now, in fact, because, like I said, there's so many different directions we can go, but let's go into the largest industry trends. You just touched on it, and I think that one of the things that people think about is, I can target things now. I can target them really well because there's data somewhere. Is that actually just a fallacy that everyone has to kind of stop kind of putting forth? That there's areas obviously where there is no data.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a perspective. So before I was at Vevo, I was on the agency side. So working with a lot of different clients on targeting solutions, incorporating data sets. One thing that I noticed is an incredible reliance on Meta and Google Ads. And, you know, those folks have very high fidelity audience segments because it's their first party data, what people are searching for, you know, what posts their social media posts they're engaging in. And then I think when you translate to CTV, you see an audience, you're like, oh, pet owners, oh, horror movie fans. And you just assume, if you're a more naive buyer, that that is as high quality of an audience as you would purchase on Meta. And it's not. So to the point around, like, yes, this data is there, but is it really high quality? Is it really going to be performant ultimately for the advertiser? That's a big question mark. And the answer can vary, I think, depending on the vendor you're talking about.
So why isn't the data there? Just give us a summary, not a really long.
Fragmentation, lack of not to, I know IAB is trying to bring us together and get everyone working together, but I think it's fragmentation, and I also think it's the way distribution works, at least for the fast channel ecosystem. A lot of that is gate-kept by the partners that are distributing, and it's their data, and they want to hold on to it.
Okay, and that's understandable.
Can I add to that too?
Oh, of course you can.
Right. So just for your last point, right, the first thing when you buy a new TV, you download an app, they ask for your email address, or your name, or your age. That never makes it to the publisher, right? That is gate-kept. It's first-party data that's super important for them identifying or having an authenticated user, So that information exists, but it's siloed, especially in FAST. I feel like more than other places where Vevo has a channel across all of these, or multiple channels rather, right, across different platforms, and yet you don't have the same first-party access that the platform does when they're making the same sale.
Okay. And since we don't have a person here from a large platform, we'll have to figure out, so what do you do when you just don't have that access to data?
Good question. I think there's a lot of different third-party solutions that come in and try to have or match their data segments to your users via device ID or IP address. But that requires another integration or more money, and it's just, and then we've got platforms that also are precluding device ID and IP address unless you pay an extra $1.25, $2 CPM to the platform. So I think it requires more creativity on an individual publisher basis.
Yeah, I agree. I think creativity for sure in how you work around places where you might not have data. I think the other trend we're seeing is a rise of what we're now calling idealist targeting, aka contextual targeting, but brought back. And I mean, the idea of contextual targeting is like, or idealist targeting is, okay, I'm going to find the content that over-indexes on these audiences. So I'm going to circumvent all of the identity and person-level targeting issues. And to be honest with you, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily because of all the because when you do have the person-level targeting or the household-level targeting, you're getting there via many matches, many bridges, lookalike models along the way. And so the quality of that audience may not even be that great in the end, whereas the contextual ones, you sort of zoomed out. And I do find accuracy there could be better than the person-level targeting.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, I was at an event recently where People Inc. was presenting their platform that does ID-less targeting, and like this is one example I remember. Like people who like Taylor Swift or visit Taylor Swift articles are more likely to buy cruise tickets. That was interesting data point. So you can monitor the behavior without like ID and just make a cohort of people, and then it's still able to infer data from that.
I mean, why should we expect access to data? A lot of European advertising does not. It's more focused on contextual. Why should we? In fact, Bruno, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, it's very frustrating, to be honest. Well, for us, we work globally, so we know how things are in Japan or in Europe, in Germany, and in US, in LATAM, and it's impressive what you can do, making things more personalized. So it's better for everyone. So I believe that we need to get access to data because it's better for the consumer. In the end, we can deliver more contextualized, more interesting, more, and that converts better. So I believe, again, I told that yesterday on a panel, but I believe that this will happen because it's profitable. So we will get access to data, we'll use data and so on. And then we will evolve on using metadata, taxonomy, and so doing things better and so on, because we have access to the data. But it's mainly because it's better for the consumer, and I believe so.
Okay, but what if I don't want my data used?
What if?
What if I don't want my data used?
Oh, then you get worst ads, you get the worst experience.
Okay.
Well, no, I honestly think that's why there needs to be continued innovation in this space, not just contextual targeting, but MMM, right? Look beyond MTA, go past the dream of like, okay, we're going to be able to track every single person and every single action. We need to look beyond that. Like I think about when Apple made that change to iOS where you couldn't track anymore without user consent cross-app. And, Meta obviously significantly affected Meta. And then it's like, so what do you do there? Does that mean that brands should just not advertise to iPhone users because you can't track if they converted? That sounds, really stupid, I think, to all of us here. That's just not a strategic thing. But brands were doing that because they're like, well, if I can't measure it, then I can't report on it to my board and it's not real. But I think we need to get beyond that because it's not actually in the best interest of the advertisers and their businesses.
Okay.
But just to complement, I believe that also, again, we can do a lot with inference as well, even if part of the users don't want to share their data.
Right.
We can infer a lot of segmentation and so on, and also the ad-less or the contextual ad placement is also very good. It's a good alternative as well.
So, what is some of the common thoughts or misconceptions that come from the agency side about data?
Misconceptions, you said?
Yes.
That one KPI can be measured everywhere as like one source of truth. And to be fair to the agencies, I think that they get some of that pressure from the advertisers sometimes. Like, you might have a CMO who's like, I only care about sales lift, only show me sales lift. And it's challenging because those KPIs are not universal, like they're not universal across publishers, right? It can be difficult to implement some of those measurement solutions, not to mention upper funnel media and lower funnel media perform very differently. So that's one thing we used to see all the time. I think the other trap is, and hopefully there aren't too many holding company folks in the room, but the other trap is around these massive planning tools or like big MMM, big MTA solution. We're going to own this. We're going to do it all. I think maybe they feel like they need to build that to be competitive, and I know there are some clients that demand it. It's really difficult to do that well. It's already really difficult for the established tech companies that have been doing this for a while. And so I just, as a publisher now, working with those agencies trying to build such tools, you can see the challenge. And like Vevo is a great example of we're always the exception because so much of our inventory is on YouTube. It's really hard for us to integrate into those systems.
Is there a spec for that?
Yeah, I mean, there is a spec for that, like MMM specs, which define which define the raw signals, like how do you understand those signals. So yeah, there is a spec for that.
Okay, how about a little bit further as to, how is IAB Tech Lab kind of helping people who have to talk to the agencies address some of their misconceptions?
I mean, we do it through specs and guidance that we provide. So if you look at the first bucket, like the audience data, we have several specs there. Like if you have IDs, like emails and all, we have something called pair, where you can, publisher and advertiser can do their matching and find the exact person. For some of the use cases, like remarketing, you do need to find the exact person. So it helps there. We do have a similar counterpart of that for attribution and measurement called AdMap, where you can take the data afterwards of the campaign and use similar methods to do the matching. So we have defined the spec for that so that it's privacy safe, it's encrypted, and it's ready to be used in what they call the data clean rooms today. So we provide that kind of guidance. We have a whole guidance on ID solutions, like what does an ID really mean, how you should handle IDs in a privacy safe manner. And then we have a whole guidance on ID less, like what are the different parameters that you can capture, and how can you assemble all of the data, how can you assemble a cohort and derive data from where you don't have an ID environments like Safari or iOS.
Okay, I'm going to ask a silly question. So just because I have data, does that mean it's worth more? Anybody can actually speak to this.
I mean, there's always data is always of value. That's why you see, like when Sara was saying, like they're not giving you the IDs. So data on its own doesn't mean anything. In ID-less solutions, we are trying to make sense out of it, like just having data on its own. But really, like when you marry the data to the ID to a person, that's when it really becomes valuable. That's why they don't want to disclose the email IDs, because everybody's trying to hoard or create scarcity around the first-party data, and that increases. Anything that becomes more scarce goes off in value.
Okay. I had to ask. I mean, so Bruno, when you have customers come to you and you start talking about different solutions, what are like the one thing that you can say to them that makes them kind of go, aha, this is really important to me?
I believe that on the same topic as well, but first-party data, well, already, but will become more and more and more a differentiator, a competitive differentiator. So having control of your first-party data and monetizing over it, it's key, I believe, to any player. So for us, it's not only really explaining what's happening, but when we explain them that they can use the data and really improve the product that they are offering, this is the click. Like, okay, let's do it. Because I believe that at this point we've passed this era of analytics and seeing what's happening, looking at KPIs. We are at the era that we need to use data to act. If you're not using it, doesn't really matter. It's not even worth it to track it. So if you're not using it, don't track. But I believe that the most important thing is how can I use the data to improve what I'm doing. And this from a product, from an ad placement, from a content delivery perspective, from all areas, I believe that it's how can I use this data.
Okay. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Because I do have another question that's similar but different. No, okay. We talked about low fill rates on our planning call. So realistically, why should we expect fill rates to be higher? That's me going higher in my voice. Sara, why don't you?
Because they used to be quite a bit higher.
They used to be higher, okay, but just because it was doesn't mean it will.
No, and I think I have this conversation a lot with folks, but there used to be a lot more equity in the bid stream even between a publisher and a platform with the signals that were passed. So a lot of that, depending on who controls the ad insertion, has changed over the last couple of years, and so we keep talking about gatekeepers, but I feel like that has become more of an issue lately. But there's also this problem of scale. I think that is one we don't always talk about, where the supply bubble has ballooned substantially. But if you're a small or an independent publisher that has, let's say you have a couple of different fast channels, how are you then supposed to stand out in a programmatic ecosystem when you don't have the same access to first-party data? Your bid stream looks naked in comparison to the platforms, and then you've got, this tiny drop in the pool, and you're trying to make sure that you're noticed, right? So it's become a lot more challenging for small folks to stand out in such a big supply space when they don't have the same access to data that others do. Okay. So that, I think, in turn, lowers the price. It lowers the fill rate because folks don't know what they're buying anymore, or they can preferentially buy into much bigger funnels or pipes instead of, if it's going through the big tube straight to Disney versus Danger TV or Vevo or another tiny publisher, right? It just doesn't seem to make it there without the same signals.
I think the flip side of that is data vendors and identity vendors know that this is happening, and every pitch now is, we're going to improve your signal and you're going to see massive increase in fill rate. I'm sure Sara can attest to this. And just they're starting to run the tests, and I'm starting to hear from folks in the industry, no, it didn't improve my fill rate. It did not do what they said it was going to do to the CPM. And so that might be a hard reality that we have to face at some point, that yes, marginal improvement from signal, but maybe it doesn't fully counteract the fact that the supply is much greater now.
Okay, I'm kind of curious as to how long they were measuring for.
A 2-month pilot, something like that, around there.
Sorry, Shailley.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is that in a real-time bidding or auction transaction, which is primarily the mode, like even through deal IDs, it goes through that process. There is a buyer's designate called a DSP or demand-side platform that is doing the actual buying. And they buy when they know the data. It doesn't matter what data you give them unless they are confident of that data and they know that data. That's when they will buy, they will bid, they will price it accordingly, they will evaluate your request properly. So in the last 10, 15 years, it was easy because the whole ecosystem was driven by third-party data, like a third-party cookie or a device ID like IDFA or Android ID. And buyers had access to that, and they had other sources that would feed them the data based on that device ID. So it was really easy for them to buy. Now suddenly you move to streaming, and you move to all of these privacy regulatory restrictions, like Nadine might just want to opt out and not give her data, so you don't have anything on that user, and then restrictions placed by Safari, like where third-party cookie is gone for 40% of the web today, and then iOS restricting the IDFA, which I think now is about less than 20% is available. That's the metric that I'm hearing. So that piece of identity or data that was used to make the buys is gone, like from 50, 60% of the web and the streaming. I think that's a big factor in those low fill rates compared to what you used to see before. And then going back to Bruno's point, like that's where first-party data comes in. So now the access to having first-party data, being able to exchange that with the buyer, so the buyer also knows that data is the key to affecting those better transactions, higher fill rates, and better yields.
And what's challenging about that conclusion, though, is for all the fast players out there, all the content owners, there's just so little first-party data, and there's no way to get that identity. And so that's where there's the struggle right now.
One other factor I think, which I don't have data on, so I could be completely wrong, is that the shift to streaming has also changed the behavior, like the time shift of when people actually consume media. So if I'm binge watching like at 12 midnight, like not many advertisers know which ad to show me at that point in time. They are used to their regular linear programming, time, space things, or even with the mobile behavior and all, there was a trend in the early on they didn't know, but then they later on learned the behavior, what kind of activities people do at what time. So they were ready with the demand at that point in time. So I think that is another issue that probably will take some time for them to learn those behaviors better and be adjust to this time shift of consumption.
You know, we didn't talk about this that much, or we don't have a question to address this that you got in advance, but I'm going to bring up AI anyway. Is that going to make, you're laughing already. Is that going to make any of this better?
Is what exactly?
Is using AI, is it going to help you at one point improve the fill rates? Is it going to help you do better targeting?
It depends. I mean, right now, the hype for most consumers is generative AI.
Yeah.
Generative AI is not as applicable, in my opinion, to a lot of these monetization, optimization use cases, right? We're not necessarily generating anything. But yes, long term, yeah, I would imagine that targeting would get richer. You might get richer personas, for sure. I think it's going to take time for buyers to care about that and see the ROI from those deeper audiences. On the measurement side, less immediate applications to generative AI that I've seen so far, but time will tell. I mean, it seems to be able to slide its way in everywhere now.
We have a couple of clients that have been piloting a piece of AI software that changes the floors in real time for real-time bidding, which has had mixed degrees of success or failure. So I think that's one way in which folks are trying to improve fill rate of, let me find the sweet spot of rate for a specific channel or platform in that exact moment in time. And it'll come through and adjust them, and you'll go back and be like, wait, what just happened? I can't optimize as a human, but to see what's wrong because their change logs look insane. But that's one way in which folks are trying to, by playing with pricing, help for fill rate, or for Shailley, to your point earlier, during prime time, right, you'll see that go absolutely bonkers. It goes all over the place because everyone's trying to buy at the same time, which then makes it, it's harder for those advertisers that spread out, right? They might have gotten more share of voice or viewability instead of then all competing in this very condensed period of time.
So we have two things. Bruno, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I believe that AI will make things probably easier and more scalable. But at some point, I mean, what we can do is stop wasting placements, stop wasting exposure, and so I believe, so being more effective. And on that, I believe there's a lot of work, homework that we need to do before, like using AI, for instance, to improve our metadata or taggings and so on. So there's a lot of things that we could be doing already, so without a magical solution. That probably will make us a lot more efficient, more quickly, and make it scalable, I believe so.
Okay. Now, I sense that there might be one person or two people in the audience who have some questions. So if we can get a mic eventually, and I'm just going to ask for the questions in a second. Are there questions you guys want to ask of each other, since you all work in slightly different areas?
I guess question for you, not to put you on the spot, Shailley. What do you think it's going to take to get more standardization in this space, to get publishers and agencies to adopt standards? I'm just curious your perspective on rollout and process adoption.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2-3 areas that we are looking at. We're talking to agencies and everyone to kind of push more standardization. One is for improving the privacy, to use like standards like PAIR and AdMap to do your processing of the data. So that way there's no data leakage, and the security of that PII is kind of ensured. The second one is around, we've made a big push since last year, is what we call the Ad Creative ID framework. This is basically an ad ID for every creative. I think that bridges the gap across advertising through different channels, cross screen. You can have one view of the campaign, and they can do better justice to that creative. Also, from the publisher's point of view, they can manage frequency better, at least within their environments. And they can also manage like competitive separation. Like you're not buying Nike and Reebok in the same ad break. So publishers can do that once they have this ad creative ID. So that will drastically improve yields because now you're spreading out that share of voice. You're being able to control that. So that's the second one. And then, of course, we're pushing for a better verification, which is through Open Measurement SDK, that they should mandate use of Open Measurement SDK because it gives like two really important signals that agencies are looking for, which are not available on CTV or streaming TV today, is whether the TV is off, and then the assessment of binge watching, like how long the user has not had any activity. And then you can implement your policies then, like, after 2 hours, I won't consider this as impressions anymore, or things like that. So those are the three areas that we are really pushing agencies and brands to kind of ask for, and publishers to cooperate with them and implement these standards.
Are you going to start getting those notifications like on Netflix? Are you still watching?
Yeah. So we basically capture like last user activity and report that with each impression. So with each impression, you can know like it's 2 hours have passed, then I wouldn't consider this impression watched by a human anymore. So, or whatever your policy is. Like some have 4 hours policy, some have 2 hours. But that's how you get all the data that you need to improve fills, to improve better targeting, to improve better measurement.
Other questions for each other?
I would like to ask one for you too, probably. I mean, we see like creative solutions like to bring us closer to conversions, direct conversions, like, I don't know, ads that are placing QR codes that you can scan with your phone and then go into, make a purchase or something like that. I wonder if you believe in this kind of solution that take us closer to bottom funnel.
Okay, who's that addressed to? Natasha?
I'm already seeing direct response ads or placing them for folks, and there are conversions. And then one we tested recently was a phone number. And the fact that people actually called in on the phone was surprising, especially for what that publisher, who they thought their audience was. You wouldn't expect that age group to pick up the phone. But we have seen some success with direct response, the QR codes, and surprisingly to me, a phone number.
I think we're seeing growth there too, but it only works for some brands, right? It has to be the right product to actually motivate people to pick up the phone, do the QR code. And it's tough because CPMs aren't the cheapest on CTV, so it can be tough to see that positive ROAS, I think.
Can that be done at scale? Can you do something like that, the QR codes that help?
In the end, what we aim on is to take it to the bottom of the funnel. So we can track the whole user interaction with each placement, each ad, so all the interactions we can track, and also starting with the segmentation of the audience, what we are delivering to which user. What's this user profile, what do they like, and so on. So all this story is the basis of our product, but it only makes sense if we can get closer to the conversion, because it's for our awareness.
And something like that is important for CTV because in mobile and in laptop, like your display, the attribution, like the action was kind of on the same device, so it was easier to track. But here, like it's almost always on a different device altogether. So if you can have something that's able to connect, like a QR code interaction, or I found Amazon's pretty interesting, like watching Prime and then there's an ad, and if you open your app and you're signed in as the same user, it just pops up like right there.
So they're doing good things with their data. They're following, their data's following.
They're using the data in a good way. So.
I have other questions for this panel, but let's just see, is there anybody in the audience who has a question? And we do have, okay, so Miss up in the front. We have a mic coming towards you. Yes. I can barely see people, so if I call you Miss or Mr. and you're not, I apologize.
Get offended.
No, this is just for all the data that is available or isn't available. Is there any, whether it's direct response, direct sold, or programmatic, is there one that's a lot easier? So maybe with Vevo or Sara, with your publishers that you work with, do they try to just fill as much programmatic as they can because that's where data is easiest, or is it where they fall back on direct response? How do you guys?
I have found, and then your product as well, for and talk about QR codes and other things. Transmit is great for this with your L bars and other stuff. But I found folks going to direct response when they're really struggling with fill, because then it's a cost per acquisition basis. So they're then paying the ad serving fee in hopes for conversion. So I found folks doing that more, I don't want to say out of desperation, but out of needing to be creative and to find other ways to monetize that remnant inventory.
Our waterfall is pretty traditional in that we have a large direct sales team, right? We have presence on YouTube and Fast. That's always going to come first. And so programmatic is what we go to next and last. And there's tiers within that, but by and large, that's the hierarchy.
Good question.
I think getting like local, like there are a lot of companies that are trying to get more local advertisers onto the platforms. I think that'll help a lot. So one thing you have to understand is, like in TV, you have a program, you make like 20 ads in an hour, and then you're done. You just need 20 advertisers. Here, like if 5 million people are watching, you probably need like 250 advertisers to kind of fill that. So that's, I think over time, like it'll get settled, but that's the transition that we're making with CTV.
And then the locals were mostly going towards programmatic, right?
Yeah, it'll all, like, that's where they'll fit right in. Like,
I was being modest. Okay. Want to go for the next one? Here?
No. Yeah, the sense is certainly that this whole area has sped forward tremendously over the last few years. If you could look forward, is there a golden aspiration? Boy, that'll be the day when we can do this. What is the this that you might be striving for some years down the road?
I love this question. That sounds great. Who can talk to that?
I go first.
Sure.
I think our publishers would love equality or parity with their platforms, just to have access to that first-party data and be able to know who their audience is and be able to sell it. So for a lot of my clientele, that would be the goal they're looking forward for, of I want access to my inventory, not all of it be a revenue share, and I want access to the first-party data that you have already gathered on my user base.
I agree with Sara, but may not ever happen.
It is a pipe dream.
Something that may happen in, let's say, 3 to 5 years is I think we're going to see tremendous operational efficiency improvement with AI agentic tools. We're already starting to see that impact how we do things. That will ultimately ripple down into better optimization, better waterfall optimization, being able to consolidate pieces across a very fragmented ecosystem and optimize it centrally. I think that is attainable, I believe, in the 3 to 5 year window. And I think we're going to see a lot of publishers, I mean, they've already started trying to pilot these agentic solutions to reach that.
Anybody else on this?
I believe in a realistic step-by-step process, and I believe that we'll get there. So at a point that culturally we all start to use more data, being more data-driven, and then starting to use more standardization, and then everybody... I believe that we won't democratize all the data. I believe the first-party data will be like, okay, this is my differentiator. But using the same standards, so all publishers can look at the same data from the audiences. I believe that better tagging on the content itself, which is something that it's not very common, but using taxonomy to tag the content and get a better contextual data as well. So I believe this will happen. So it's a natural process. And at that point, I believe that we'll be able to use AI to scale things for real. Yeah.
From our point of view, like having standards being implemented and all these fragmented systems, they'll still stay fragmented, like you said, like nobody's going to part with their first-party data. But at least if they can interoperate and reduce that friction, we've seen that that actually helps grow the industry, that helps the ad spend to grow in proportion with the actual user consumption, which is not there today. So I think that's what we look forward to.
I'm going to actually also answer this. I usually don't. For research that I've been doing on a new column we're going to be running, I've been talking to asset management companies who are talking about everything is going to be tagged in the future. Everything that they have now for certain companies is tagged already. So there's my 2 cents. Anybody else in the audience have a question? We will run a mic over.
Hi, my question kind of goes back to the fill rate question, and I'm curious if you kind of look at the traditional TV ecosystem, call it broadcast and cable, and still sitting on a massive pile of, let's say, 60 billion or whatever the number is right now. How much of, like, is there a, I'm going to call it the trad lag, like the money that hasn't followed the viewership that CTV and FAST has aggregated? Like, is there, how much better does the fill rate situation get, and what would the time horizon be if it's really kind of a question of just, you know, there's less viewership on those traditional platforms, and yet the advertisers, publishers are still getting rate increases every year, which is kind of crazy because it should be a much less data-rich environment, right? So, like, what's the fair share? Like, should there be another 10 billion that's sitting in CTV right now? And then when that does come, how long will it take, and what will that do to fill rates? Like, is that a real thing, or are they just going to keep all the money all the way down to their steady state, you know, at half the size they are now?
Okay, so is the question, can I sum this up as in when is the money going to move?
Yes.
Excellent, okay. I'm not sure these people are psychic, but does anybody want to take a shot at this?
Literally a Bob Iger question, really.
Does anyone have any feelings about trends they're seeing?
I think there's a general sense of frustration from folks seeing those numbers, right? Where there's more and more money coming into CTV, but less and less in a publisher or content owner's pocket. And so I don't know when that changes. I know there's a lot of talk about supply chain and removing resellers and like kind of making as clean a path as possible from the advertiser to the content owner. But a lot of those other things popped up because algorithms prefer scale. And so like there's kind of almost a tech issue, I feel like, that we don't talk about very often of until an algorithm prefers a direct path over the easiest path. It's, I think, my crystal ball says that makes it really difficult for that money to then get directly into a publisher's pocket. Creates a lot of different types of inefficiency. So hopefully it comes soon. That's the big talk of the last couple of months, I feel like. But I don't know if the underlying issue has really been addressed, especially for smaller folks.
It's probably also not one for one, right? It's not going to be like linear spend goes down, CTV spend goes up, because maybe the spend goes to other places too. With so much focus on performance now, it could go to social, right? Or other digital platforms outside of CTV.
Is there anything streaming can do to make it more attractive so they don't lose their advertising budget?
Isn't like the ad spend this last year like overtook linear on the digital streaming side? I think it just crossed over, like more than half was on the CTV side, and it's moving. I think one of the other factors is the licensing. So, I mean, if you look at Disney's announcement, like they've pretty much taken everything to streaming, except like they don't know what to do with ESPN because of all the sports licensing, live event licensing. I think those contracts are about to expire like 5 to 7 years from now for most of the big sporting events. I think that will be like a big trigger point of moving a lot more dollars towards streaming at that stage.
Sports is the new big shiny object, though, I feel like. For, you know, the NFL has moved over, all of these other things. I think the first opening weekend on some of the key rate platforms, the average CPM, someone told us, was $65, which is the prices we all heard about forever ago if you start at the very top, right? So I think some of that money, too, is getting shifted to, you know, the Disneys
Yeah, I
of the
think that
world or NFL
live
games.
sports, I think, will be a big driver of the big money shift that we'll see.
One other thing I'm seeing when I talk to some bigger media companies is the programmatic options for small and medium businesses is something that they've been pushing for a while now and will likely continue to grow. I have no other data on that, though.
I think it'll be interesting, too, to see a lot of folks have been, if we want to go back to AI, right, for local or small local advertisers to create something with AI that can be seen on a big screen. I think it remains to be seen how well that converts for an audience. If your local dentist wants to advertise programmatically, you know, and make an ad for it, what is that? Does that actually generate any meaningful scale? And I feel like that's kind of been a buzz. Magnite just made a release about that recently, and I know I've seen it a few other places, but does that unlock any meaningful spend, or is it still just, you know, a drop in the bucket?
Yeah, okay. We unfortunately are out of time. So if you have other questions for these folks and they're still here, you can continue in private. But I want to thank the panel. That was a very interesting talk on a very general topic. So hopefully we've brought some insight to it.
Thank you for having us.